They say betrayal is a quiet kind of scream, one that echoes in your chest long after the moment has passed. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom, cradling my empty teacup, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold it without spilling. I told my husband I was flying abroad for work, needing distance I couldn't even admit to myself I craved. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Mary, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a modest apartment in Queens, New York, where the subway rumbles beneath my feet every morning at 6:15 sharp. The sound used to comfort me. It meant the world was moving, that life was happening somewhere beyond these thin walls. Now it just reminds me how everyone else has somewhere to go while I remain here, waiting. The apartment smells like yesterday's coffee and the faint mustiness that settles into old furniture. My hands, spotted with age and worn from decades of caring for others, wrap around my morning mug like it's the only warmth I'll receive all day. The arthritis makes simple tasks feel like small victories. Opening a jar, turning a doorknob, holding on to hope. I used to imagine flying somewhere far away, maybe California for a business trip that existed only in my mind. I'd picture myself on a plane, looking down at the patchwork of cities below, feeling free for the first time in years. But at 72, with a fixed income and a family that barely acknowledges my existence, those dreams felt as distant as the stars I used to wish upon as a child. That particular morning started like all the others. I made breakfast for two, though my husband Robert rarely spoke during our meals. 47 years of marriage, and we'd somehow become strangers sharing the same address. He'd grunt his thanks, leave his plate for me to wash, and disappear into his newspaper or that old recliner that had molded to his body over the years. I might have a work opportunity, I told him that Tuesday morning, the lie slipping out before I could stop myself. Out of state. Maybe out of the country. He looked up from his crossword puzzle, his reading glasses perched on his nose like a barrier between us. Work? Mary, you're retired. Consulting, I said quickly, surprising myself with how easily the deception flowed. They want someone with my experience in bookkeeping. Robert shrugged and returned to his puzzle. No questions about where or when or how long. No concern about me traveling alone at my age. Just indifference wrapped in the morning routine we'd perfected through decades of emotional distance. The truth was, I'd been researching trips online. Not for work, but for escape. I'd look at pictures of European cities, small bed and breakfasts in Vermont, anywhere that wasn't this apartment where my voice echoed unanswered off the walls. I had some savings, money I'd quietly set aside from my pension, small amounts Robert never noticed because he'd stopped paying attention to our finances years ago. Or so I thought. That afternoon, my daughter Linda called. My heart always jumped when I saw her name on my phone, hope blooming in my chest like a flower reaching for sunlight. Maybe she wanted to visit. Maybe she needed advice. Maybe she just wanted to hear her mother's voice. Mom, I need to ask you something, she said without preamble. No hello. No, how are you feeling? Just need. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Can you lend me $3,000? Just temporarily. Mark's construction business hit a rough patch, and we're behind on the mortgage. My financial advisor had warned me about this. The way adult children sometimes view their aging parents as personal ATMs, dispensing money on demand with no expectation of repayment. But Linda was my daughter. My baby who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who brought me dandelions she thought were the most beautiful flowers in the world. I can help a little, I said carefully. But $3,000 is most of my emergency fund. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Then her voice changed, cooler, more distant. I thought you cared about your family, Mom. I thought you'd want to help your granddaughter keep her home. There it was. The guilt, sharp and precise, finding its mark in my heart. Emma, my 10-year-old granddaughter with pigtails and gap-toothed smiles, losing her home because Grandma was too selfish to help. Let me check my account, I whispered. Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. I'll pay you back as soon as Mark's next job comes through. I'd heard those words before. From Linda when she needed money for Emma's school supplies. From my son David when his car broke down and he couldn't afford repairs. From Robert when he wanted to invest in his buddy's restaurant idea that never materialized. I'll pay you back. The family motto, never honored but always believed. After I hung up, I sat in my small kitchen, looking out the window at Mrs. Chen hanging laundry on the fire escape across the courtyard. She was my age, maybe older, but she moved with purpose. Her grown son visited every Sunday, sometimes bringing his children who would wave at me through my window. I always waved back, pretending I was part of their joy. My own grandchildren lived 45 minutes away in Westchester, in a house I'd helped finance when Linda first got married. I saw them maybe 3 times a year, Christmas, Easter, and Emma's birthday if I was lucky. Linda always had reasons why I couldn't visit more often. The kids were busy with activities. Mark was working. They didn't want to impose on my time, as if my time belonged to something more important than loving my family. That evening, I decided to install a small security camera in our living room. I told myself it was for safety. We lived in Queens, after all, and break-ins weren't uncommon. But deep down, I knew I was looking for something else. Evidence. Proof of the growing suspicion that had been gnawing at me like a persistent ache. The camera was tiny, barely noticeable, tucked behind a picture frame on the bookshelf. I ordered it online and set it up while Robert was at his weekly poker game. The technology felt foreign in my arthritic fingers, but YouTube tutorials walked me through every step. Amazing how much you can learn when loneliness drives you to try new things. Robert never noticed the camera, just like he never noticed the new lock I'd put on my small filing cabinet where I kept important papers. Just like he never noticed when I started dyeing the gray out of my hair, hoping to feel younger, more visible. We'd become experts at not seeing each other. The next morning, I sat at my computer and booked the trip I'd been dreaming about. Not abroad, that had been too ambitious, but to a small inn in the Hudson Valley, 2 hours north of the city. 3 days and 2 nights away from the apartment, away from the phone that only rang when someone needed money, away from the marriage that had somehow become a business arrangement where I provided domestic services and financial support in exchange for, what? A roof over my head? The illusion of companionship? I leave tomorrow, I told Robert over dinner. He looked up from his meatloaf, the same meatloaf I'd been making for 40 years because it was his favorite and I'd forgotten I had preferences too. How long? He asked. 3 days. He nodded and returned to eating. No questions about where I was staying or whether I'd be safe. No offers to drive me to the airport or pick me up when I returned. Just acceptance that I would disappear for a while, like I was a mildly inconvenient houseguest rather than his wife. That night, I packed my small suitcase with clothes I rarely wore, a blue dress Linda had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, still with tags attached because I had nowhere special to go. A silk scarf my sister had sent from Arizona before she passed. Comfortable shoes for walking in places where no one knew my name or my history of quiet disappointments. I lay awake listening to Robert snore in the bed beside me, this man I'd promised to love in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. We'd kept the last promise by default, neither of us had died yet. But somewhere along the way, we'd buried our marriage so quietly I couldn't remember when the funeral had taken place. The next morning, I took a cab to LaGuardia Airport, though my train to the Hudson Valley didn't leave from there. I needed Robert to think I was really flying somewhere important, somewhere far enough away that he couldn't reach me easily. The cab driver, a young man with kind eyes, helped me with my suitcase. Business trip, he asked, making conversation as we navigated through Queens traffic. Something like that, I replied, looking out the window at the neighborhood where I'd spent most of my adult life. The bodega where I bought milk and newspapers. The dry cleaner who knew my name and always asked about my family. The bus stop where I waited every Tuesday to visit my doctor, watching younger people scroll through their phones while I sat with my hands folded, having no one to text. At the airport, I bought an overpriced coffee and sat in the departure lounge, watching families reunite and lovers say goodbye. Then I took another cab to Penn Station, where I boarded the train that would carry me north to a small town I'd never seen, to an inn run by strangers who wouldn't know I was someone's disappointing mother or neglected wife. The train ride was beautiful. The Hudson River sparkled in the afternoon sun, and I watched small towns roll past the window like scenes from a movie about someone else's life. Someone braver. Someone who took trips and had adventures and didn't spend their evenings watching the security camera feed on their phone, hoping to catch their husband in, what? I wasn't even sure what I expected to find. The inn was everything the website had promised, a Victorian house with wraparound porches and gardens full of flowers whose names I didn't know. My room was small but charming, with lace curtains and a view of rolling hills that stretched beyond my ability to see. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. I went to bed that first night without checking my phone, without watching the news, without setting an alarm for the next morning's routine. I slept better than I had in years, wrapped in unfamiliar sheets in an unfamiliar place where no one needed anything from me. The next morning, I woke naturally and spent an hour sitting on the small balcony outside my room, drinking coffee and watching birds whose songs I'd forgotten existed in the city. Then I remembered the camera. I opened the app on my phone, expecting to see our empty living room or maybe Robert watching television in his recliner. Instead, what I saw made my coffee cup slip from my hands, hot liquid splashing across the wooden deck. Robert wasn't alone. A woman sat beside him on our couch that I'd saved for 6 months to buy when we first moved to the apartment. She was younger than me, maybe in her 50s, with perfectly styled hair and clothes that looked expensive. They were laughing at something on the television, but it was the way she leaned against him that made my stomach clench. Familiar. comfortable. Like they'd done this many times before. Robert's arm was around her shoulders, the same shoulders I'd massaged when his back ached from his construction job, the same shoulders that rarely touched mine anymore unless he was reaching across me for the remote control. I watched, frozen, as this woman, this stranger in my living room, got up and walked to my kitchen. She opened my refrigerator like she knew where everything was kept. She poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle I didn't recognize, expensive wine we never bought because Robert always said it was a waste of money. Who is she? I whispered to no one, but the birds had stopped singing, as if they too were holding their breath. The answer came quickly enough. When she returned to the couch, Robert pulled her close and kissed her forehead, a tender gesture I couldn't remember him making toward me in years. They looked comfortable together. Happy. Like a couple who enjoyed each other's company rather than simply endured it. I scrolled back through the camera footage, my hands shaking as I discovered the truth I'd suspected but never wanted to confirm. She'd been there the night before too, arriving just 30 minutes after my cab had pulled away. She'd been there last week when I thought Robert was at poker with his buddies. She'd been there that afternoon when I was at the grocery store, buying ingredients for his favorite meals that he barely acknowledged. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? Had she been sitting in my living room, drinking from my glasses, laughing at my husband's jokes while I was in the next room, invisible and unwanted? I set my phone aside and walked to the bathroom, where I stared at my reflection in the unfamiliar mirror. Gray hair I kept meaning to color but never found the energy for. Lines around my eyes from years of squinting at small print and holding back tears. Clothes that prioritized comfort over style because who was I trying to impress? When had I become this woman? When had I stopped being Mary, the young woman who dreamed of adventure, who'd loved dancing and trying new restaurants and staying up late talking about the future, and become just mom, just the wife, just the person who handled the mundane necessities of life while everyone else lived? I sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried, deep, silent sobs that shook my entire body. Not just because my husband was cheating, but because I realized I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere deep inside, I'd known. The way he'd stopped really seeing me years ago. The way our conversations had dwindled to logistics and necessity. The way he never asked about my dreams or fears or the quiet ache of loneliness that had become my constant companion. But the real devastation wasn't Robert's betrayal. It was the realization that I'd become complicit in my own disappearance. I'd made myself smaller and smaller, year by year, need by need, until I was practically invisible even to myself. That afternoon, I called Linda. Not to ask for advice or to share my pain, but to test a theory that was forming in my mind like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. "Hi, sweetheart," I said when she answered. "How are you? How's Emma?" Mum. Her voice was distracted, like she was multitasking. "We're fine. Emma's at soccer practice. Mark got that job he was interviewing for." "That's wonderful," I said. "So you won't need that loan after all." Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Actually," Linda said slowly, "we could still use the money. You know, just to get caught up on things. And Mark wants to buy some new equipment for the business." New equipment. Not the mortgage payment she'd mentioned before. Not keeping Emma's home safe. Just things. "Of course," I said quietly. "I understand. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Listen, I have to run. Emma needs to be picked up in 20 minutes." She hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me holding my phone in a beautiful garden where strangers tended flowers with more care than my own daughter showed me. I spent the rest of that day walking through the small town, looking in shop windows and sitting on park benches, trying to remember who I was before I became defined by what I could provide for others. In a small bookstore, I found a journal with a deep blue cover and bought it along with a pen that felt substantial in my hand. That evening, sitting on the inn's porch as the sun set behind mountains I'd never bothered to visit despite living 2 hours away for 20 years, I began to write. "I am Mary," I wrote. "I am 72 years old. I like coffee strong and books with happy endings. I used to paint watercolors. I can still remember every word to songs from the 1960s. I dream of seeing the ocean again. I am not just someone's mother or wife or source of emergency funds. I am a whole person with my own heart and my own worth." It was the first time in years I'd written about myself rather than grocery lists or appointment reminders or birthday cards for people who rarely remembered mine. The second night at the inn, I barely slept. Not because I was uncomfortable, but because my mind was racing with realizations and plans and a growing sense of something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten its name: anger. Not the quiet, swallowed anger that had been simmering in my chest for years, but clean, clear, righteous anger. I was angry at Robert for his betrayal, yes, but I was angrier at myself for accepting so little for so long. When had I decided I didn't deserve passion or romance or even basic consideration? When had I agreed to become a supporting character in my own life story? I checked the camera feed one more time before I left for home. She was there again, this woman whose name I didn't know but whose presence in my home felt like a slap across my face. They were cooking dinner together, something that looked elaborate and special, the kind of meal Robert always said was too much trouble when I suggested trying new recipes. She moved around my kitchen with confidence, opening drawers and cabinets like she lived there. Maybe she did, in all the ways that mattered. Maybe I was the intruder now, the unwelcome presence disrupting their comfortable routine. The train ride home gave me 2 hours to plan what I would say, but when I walked into our apartment that afternoon, every prepared speech evaporated. Robert was alone, reading his newspaper in his usual chair, looking exactly as I'd left him 3 days ago. "How was your trip?" he asked without looking up. "Educational," I replied. He grunted acknowledgement and turned the page. Just like that, I was back to being invisible. But this time, I chose to study him while he ignored me. The soft belly that pressed against his shirt. I'd been buying increasingly larger sizes for years, never mentioning his weight gain because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. The thinning hair he combed carefully to hide his bald spot. The reading glasses that made him squint like he was perpetually annoyed with the world. Had he ever been handsome to me? Had there been a time when his presence made my heart race instead of sink? Yes, I realized. There had been. In the early years when he brought me flowers for no reason and slow danced with me in our tiny first apartment's kitchen. When he talked about the house we'd buy someday and the children we'd raise and the life we'd build together brick by brick, day by day. But that Robert, the one who'd promised to love and honor me, had been replaced gradually by this stranger who shared my address but not my dreams. When had the substitution taken place? How had I failed to notice? "Robert," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "We need to talk." "About what?" The newspaper rustled as he turned another page. "About us. About our marriage. About what we've become." He sighed the way he did when I suggested we needed a new washing machine or wanted to discuss our budget. Like I was interrupting something important with my trivial concerns. "What about our marriage, Mary?" "We're fine. We've been married 47 years. That doesn't happen by accident." "When was the last time we had a real conversation?" I asked. Not about bills or appointments or who's picking up groceries, but a real conversation about our lives, our feelings, our dreams. He folded his newspaper and looked at me directly for the first time in months. His eyes were cloudy behind his glasses, and I saw something there that might have been guilt or might have just been irritation. "Dreams," he repeated. "Mary, we're in our 70s. What dreams are you talking about?" The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. As if aging meant giving up hope, curiosity, passion, growth. As if turning 70 was the same as dying but keeping your body upright out of habit. "I dream of traveling," I said. "Of taking an art class. Of having friends over for dinner parties where we laugh until our sides ache. Of waking up excited about the day ahead instead of dreading another 24 hours of routine." Robert stared at me like I'd suggested we join the circus. "You want to travel? Where would we go?" "We're on a fixed income, Mary. We can't afford to jet set around the world like we're millionaires." "I'm not talking about luxury cruises," I said. "I'm talking about taking a weekend trip to see autumn leaves or visiting a museum we've never been to or just experiencing life instead of enduring it. This is our life," he said firmly. "This apartment, this routine, this is what we built together. If that's not enough for you, I don't know what to tell you." That night, I lay awake listening to him snore and thinking about the woman on the camera. Did Robert have dreams when he was with her? Did he laugh and plan adventures and talk about feelings? Or was she just another routine, another comfortable arrangement that required nothing of his emotional energy? The next morning, I made coffee for one. Robert appeared in the kitchen at his usual time, looking for his mug and the breakfast that had been waiting for him every morning for decades. "Where's breakfast?" he asked. "I made coffee," I replied. "I thought you might want to handle your own breakfast today." He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What's gotten into you, Mary? Are you sick?" "I'm tired," I said. "Very, very tired." That afternoon, while Robert was out, supposedly running errands but probably visiting her, I called my son David in New Jersey. "Hi, Mom," he answered on the fourth ring. "What's up?" "I'm kind of busy with work. I wanted to tell you about my trip," I said. "And ask your advice about something important." "Your trip?" "I thought you were doing some kind of consulting work." "I was researching my options," I said carefully. "David, if I needed to live somewhere else for a while, would you have room for me?" The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. "Live somewhere else?" "Mom, what are you talking about? Are you and Dad having problems?" "We're having the same problems we've had for years," I said. "I'm just finally ready to admit they exist." "Look, Mom, I don't really want to get in the middle of whatever's going on between you two. You're both adults. You should be able to work things out." "I'm not asking you to get in the middle," I said. I'm asking if your mother could stay with you temporarily if she needed a safe place to figure out her life. Another long pause. Then David's voice, sounding strained and slightly annoyed, Mom, our guest room is Emma's playroom now. And Sarah's been really stressed with her new job. Having a houseguest right now would be complicated. Emma. My granddaughter who lived with Linda, not David. He'd confused his own daughter with his sister's child, mixed up the basic facts of our family because he rarely paid enough attention to keep us straight in his mind. I understand, I said quietly. Thank you for being honest. Mom, are you okay? You sound weird. I sound like someone whose children don't really know her anymore, I replied. But I'm starting to think that might be my fault as much as yours. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to remember the last time David had called me just to talk. Not because he needed something or was obligated by a holiday or birthday, but because he missed his mother and wanted to hear her voice. I couldn't remember. The realization sat in my chest like a stone. That evening, I ordered Chinese takeout instead of cooking Robert's usual dinner. When he came home, later than usual, smelling faintly of perfume I didn't recognize, he found me eating lo mein straight from the container while reading my new journal. Where's dinner? He asked. In the refrigerator, I replied without looking up. There's leftover meatloaf from yesterday. Cold meatloaf? Mary, what's wrong with you lately? You're acting strange. That's when I looked up at him, really looked at him. This man who could kiss another woman in our living room but couldn't understand why I might be upset. This man who expected me to prepare fresh meals every night but considered himself generous for occasionally taking out the trash without being asked. I'm acting like someone who's tired of being taken for granted, I said. His face flushed red. Taken for granted? I work hard to provide for this family. I've kept a roof over your head for 47 years. This family? I repeated. What family, Robert? Our children call when they need money and visit 3 times a year if we're lucky. You come home, eat the dinner I've prepared, watch television I'm not interested in, and fall asleep without saying a dozen words to me. What exactly about this arrangement constitutes a family? You're being dramatic, he said, but his eyes darted away from mine. Every marriage goes through phases. We're comfortable together. Comfortable, I repeated. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Is that what you call this? But Robert had already retreated to his recliner and his remote control, dismissing my concerns with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. That night, I made a decision that terrified me. I waited until Robert was asleep, then quietly gathered the financial documents I'd been organizing for months. Bank statements. Investment records. Social security information. The deed to our apartment. Insurance policies. 47 years of shared assets carefully cataloged and stored in my locked filing cabinet. What I found when I spread everything across my kitchen table made my hands shake with something beyond fear. Robert had been slowly draining our joint accounts. Small amounts at first, 50 here, 100 there, easily explained as routine expenses. But over the past 2 years, nearly $15,000 had disappeared from our savings. Money I'd carefully accumulated from my pension, from the small inheritance my sister had left me, from decades of clipping coupons and buying generic brands to stretch our budget. The withdrawals coincided perfectly with the camera footage I'd been reviewing. Every time that woman appeared in our apartment, money disappeared from our account. Dinners at expensive restaurants charged to our credit card. Jewelry purchases. Weekend hotel stays I'd never taken while I was supposedly visiting my cousin in Philadelphia. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was stealing from me to pay for his affair. I sat at that kitchen table until dawn, documentation spread before me like evidence in a crime scene, which I suppose it was. The crime of trust betrayed. The crime of a marriage turned into a lie so elaborate I couldn't see where the truth had ended and the deception began. But the worst part wasn't the money or even the infidelity. It was the realization that I'd enabled it all by making myself so small, so undemanding, so grateful for scraps of attention that I'd never required the basic respect every human being deserves. When Robert shuffled into the kitchen that morning, looking for coffee and expecting breakfast, he found me sitting surrounded by papers with my hands folded calmly in my lap. What's all this? He asked, gesturing at the documents. Our financial records, I replied. Fascinating reading. Did you know we've spent $15,000 on restaurants and hotels in the past 2 years? That's interesting, considering I can't remember the last time you took me out to dinner. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. Mary, I can explain, I'm sure you can, I said. You've had years of practice explaining things that don't add up. But I'm not interested in your explanations anymore, Robert. I'm interested in honesty, and I don't think you remember what that looks like. He sat down heavily across from me, suddenly looking every one of his 74 years. It's not what you think, he began. It's exactly what I think, I interrupted. You're having an affair. You've been using our joint money to finance it. And you've been lying to me for so long that I doubt you remember what the truth sounds like. For a moment, I thought he might try to deny it. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Does it matter? The question is, how long has it been going on? He stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. 2 years. Maybe a little longer. 2 years. 730 days of coming home to me after spending time with her. 730 nights of lying beside me while planning what he'd do with her tomorrow. 730 opportunities to tell me the truth or end our marriage honorably instead of transforming me into a fool who cooked dinner for a man who was already gone. What's her name? I asked. Does that matter? It matters to me. Catherine, he whispered. Her name is Catherine. Catherine. A name I'd tested on my tongue while watching the camera footage, wondering what she called him in their private moments. Did she call him Bobby like I had when we were young? Did she laugh at his jokes and listen to his stories about work? Did she make him feel important and desired and fully seen? Do you love her? I asked. The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Finally, Robert nodded without raising his head. Yes, he said. I think I do. The admission should have shattered me, but instead I felt something unexpected, relief. Finally, after months of suspicion and self-doubt, I had the truth. My marriage was over and had been for longer than either of us had been willing to admit. Then why are you still here? I asked. Because. He struggled for words. Because this is our life, Mary. This apartment, this routine. We're too old to start over. We have history together. History, I repeated. Not love. Not respect. Not partnership. Just history. That has to count for something. I looked around our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we discussed our children's first steps and school problems and teenage rebellions, where we'd planned vacations and worried about money and dreamed about the future. All of it felt like archaeology now, artifacts from a civilization that had crumbled so gradually we hadn't noticed until we were standing in ruins. History counts for something, I agreed. It counts as the foundation for what comes next. And what comes next can't be built on lies. That afternoon, while Robert sat in his chair looking stunned and lost, I called a lawyer. Not to file for divorce, not yet, but to understand my options. What rights did I have? What would happen to our shared assets? Could I afford to live alone? The lawyer, a kind woman named Jennifer who specialized in elder care issues, listened to my story without judgment. You have more options than you might think, she said. After 47 years of marriage, you're entitled to half of everything you built together. Your Social Security benefits, your pension, your share of the apartment's equity, none of that disappears because he had an affair. But I'm 72, I said. Who starts over at 72? Someone who realizes she deserves better than she's been accepting, Jennifer replied. Mary, I see women in your situation more often than you might imagine. The statistics on late-in-life divorce are actually increasing, especially among women your age who are refusing to spend their remaining years in marriages that drain their souls. After I hung up the phone, I sat quietly in my living room, the same living room where Robert and Catherine had been playing house while I was away. For the first time in years, I tried to imagine a different life. Not just surviving day to day, but actually living with purpose and joy. What would that look like? A smaller apartment that was entirely mine, decorated with colors I loved instead of the beige neutrality we'd chosen to avoid arguments. Friends who valued my company, not just my willingness to provide meals and financial assistance. Hobbies I'd abandoned decades ago when there wasn't time for anything beyond caring for everyone else's needs. Maybe I'd take that art class I'd been thinking about. Maybe I'd join a book club or volunteer at the local library. Maybe I'd even travel, not elaborate international trips, but simple adventures to places I'd always wanted to see. The mountains of Vermont in autumn. The coast of Maine in summer. Museums and gardens and small towns where I could walk at my own pace and stop whenever something caught my interest. For the first time in years, the future felt like possibility instead of just more of the same. That evening, Linda called. Mom, I hate to ask, but could you transfer that money we discussed? The bank is getting impatient about the late fees. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Linda, I need to tell you something important. Your father and I are having serious problems. I may need that emergency fund for myself. Problems? What kind of problems? You two have been married forever. The kind of problems that happen when people stop seeing each other as whole human beings, I said. The kind of problems that build up over years of not talking honestly about what we need from each other. Mom, you're scaring me. Are you talking about divorce? At your age? At my age. As if reaching 72 meant I'd forfeited my right to expect love and respect and basic human decency. I'm talking about not accepting less than I deserve for whatever years I have left, I said. But what about family stability? What about the grandchildren? Emma adores you and Grandpa. Emma adores us, but she sees us 3 times a year. Emma sends thank you notes for birthday gifts but doesn't call to say hello. Emma is growing up thinking it's normal for grandparents to exist on the periphery of family life, contributing money and gifts and occasional babysitting but never being truly central to anyone's daily experience. Linda, when was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed something, not because it was a holiday or someone's birthday, but just because you missed hearing your mother's voice. The silence stretched long enough that I knew she was really thinking about the question instead of preparing a defensive response. Mom, you know how busy life gets with work and kids and everything. That doesn't mean I don't think about you. I know you think about me, I said gently. But thinking and connecting aren't the same thing. And I've spent so many years being grateful for crumbs of attention that I forgot I deserved the whole meal. This doesn't sound like you, Mom. You're always so understanding. So supportive. Maybe it's time I started understanding and supporting myself, I replied. After we hung up, I realized something profound. Linda was right. This didn't sound like the mother she knew, the woman who said yes to every request, who swallowed disappointment rather than voice needs, who made everyone else's comfort her primary responsibility. But maybe the mother she knew had never been my authentic self. Maybe I'd spent so many decades performing the role of selfless caregiver that I'd lost touch with the person underneath the performance. Who was I when I wasn't defined by what I could provide for others? That night, I opened my journal and began to write lists. Not grocery lists or task reminders, but inventories of my own heart. Things I loved: coffee in the early morning before anyone else was awake. The smell of rain on summer pavement. Books that made me cry happy tears. Museums where I could wander at my own pace. Gardens full of flowers I couldn't name. The way light slanted through windows on autumn afternoons. Things I missed: dancing. Cooking elaborate meals for people who truly appreciated them. Deep conversations about books and dreams and fears. Feeling beautiful. Planning adventures, even small ones. Things I wanted: respect. Genuine companionship. The freedom to say no without guilt. Financial independence. A home that felt peaceful instead of tense. Friends who knew my stories and cared about my opinions. The lists filled pages. I'd forgotten how much life I'd been carrying inside myself, how many desires I'd buried under decades of conditional availability to others. Over the next week, I began making small changes that felt revolutionary. I stopped making Robert's breakfast and instead spent those morning minutes reading or writing in my journal. I canceled the cable package that included all his sports channels and kept only the basic service with the few programs I actually enjoyed. I bought flowers for myself, bright yellow daisies that made me smile every time I walked through the kitchen. Robert noticed the changes but seemed afraid to comment directly. Instead, he became increasingly solicitous, offering to help with groceries or asking if I needed anything from the store. The attention felt hollow because I knew it was motivated by fear rather than genuine care. One afternoon, I found him cleaning the bathroom without being asked. "You don't have to do that," I said from the doorway. "I want to," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "I should have been helping more all along." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have. But not because you're afraid I'm going to leave you. Because we were supposed to be partners." He sat back on his heels, still holding the toilet brush, looking suddenly ancient and defeated. "Mary, I know I've made mistakes. Big ones. But we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can start over. With Catherine still in the picture?" His face crumpled. "I ended things with her yesterday. I told her I wanted to save my marriage." The admission should have made me happy, but instead I felt empty. He'd ended his affair not because he realized he loved me, but because he was afraid of losing the comfortable life I'd been providing. The woman who cooked his meals and managed his appointments and asked for nothing more than basic civility in return. "That's not enough, Robert," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I ended it. I chose you. You chose the idea of me. You chose the convenience of our arrangement. But when was the last time you chose to really know me? To care about my thoughts and dreams and fears? To see me as more than just the person who handles the practical details of your life?" He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language, and I realized that in many ways, I was. I was speaking the language of emotional intimacy, which had become foreign in our marriage years ago. That weekend, David came to visit, the first time in months he'd made the trip from New Jersey without a special occasion to motivate him. He brought Emma, my granddaughter, who ran to me with genuine joy and spent an hour showing me pictures on her phone of her school friends and soccer team. "Grandma Mary, you look different," she said while we sat together on the couch. "Did you change your hair?" I touched my hair, which I'd finally had professionally colored and cut into a style that made me feel more like myself. "A little bit," I said. "Do you like it?" "I love it. You look happy." "Happy? When had I last looked happy?" When had I last felt genuinely joyful about anything more substantial than a good cup of coffee or a sunny day? Emma, I said carefully, what do you remember about me and Grandpa Bob? About how we are together? She considered the question with the seriousness children bring to adult queries. You take care of Grandpa a lot, she said. And you're always asking if everyone needs anything. But sometimes you look sad when you think no one is watching. The observation, delivered with innocent honesty, hit me like a physical blow. Even my 10-year-old granddaughter had noticed what the adults in my family had been ignoring. I was disappearing inside my own life. That afternoon, while David was helping Robert fix a dripping faucet in the bathroom, Emma and I took a walk through the neighborhood. She chattered about school and friends and the book she was reading, and I realized how hungry I'd been for uncomplicated conversation with someone who simply enjoyed my company. Grandma, she said as we walked past the small park where I sometimes sat on benches watching other people live their lives, are you and Grandpa getting divorced? The question was so direct, so matter-of-fact, that I stopped walking. What made you ask that, sweetheart? Dad and Mom were talking about it in the car. They said you were acting different and they were worried about you. Worried about me, or worried about the disruption my choices might cause in their comfortable assumptions about our family dynamics? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. Sometimes people need to make big changes in their lives, even when they're older. Even when it's scary. Would you be lonely? Emma asked. The question revealed the heart of everyone's concerns, including my own. The fear that choosing myself meant choosing isolation. That demanding respect meant losing connection. That refusing to accept scraps meant starving for affection. I might be lonely sometimes, I said. But I'm already lonely now, even though I live with Grandpa. Sometimes being alone is different from being lonely. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her, which maybe it did. Children understand authenticity in ways adults often forget. When we returned to the apartment, I found David and Robert in the living room having what looked like an intense conversation. Mom, David said when he saw me, Dad told me what's been going on. About the marriage problems. I waited to hear what version of our story Robert had shared, what spin he'd put on the facts to make himself less culpable for our situation. He said you've been unhappy for a while and he didn't realize how serious it was, David continued. Is there anything Sarah and I can do to help? Maybe you two could come stay with us for a weekend, get some time away from routine? The offer was kind but missed the point entirely. This wasn't about needing a vacation from our problems. This was about acknowledging that our problems were so fundamental they might be irreconcilable. That's sweet, David, but this isn't something that can be fixed with a change of scenery, I said. Your father and I have grown into different people who want different things from life. That's not anyone's fault, but it's not something we can paper over with good intentions. But you've been married for almost 50 years, David protested. That has to count for something. It counts for a lot, I agreed. But it doesn't obligate me to spend whatever years I have left in a situation that makes me feel invisible and unvalued. David looked at Robert as if expecting him to jump in with reassurances or promises to do better. Instead, Robert sat quietly, looking smaller than I'd seen him in years. I think your mother deserves better than I've been giving her, Robert said finally. I just don't know if I know how to be better anymore. The admission was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, and paradoxically, it gave me hope, not for our marriage, but for the possibility that we might end it with dignity rather than bitterness. That evening, after David and Emma left, Robert and I sat in our living room, the scene of so much deception, and had the most real conversation we'd shared in decades. I don't want a divorce, he said. I don't want to lose you. You lost me years ago, I replied. Maybe we lost each other. The question now is whether we can find our way back to something authentic, or if we're just going to keep pretending we're happy with an arrangement that's slowly killing both of our spirits. What would it take, he asked, for us to find our way back? I'd been thinking about this question for weeks, and the answer was both simple and impossible. Honesty, I said. Complete honesty about what we want from life and from each other. No more pretending we're satisfied with minimal effort. No more accepting routine as a substitute for connection. No more making each other small to avoid conflict. I can do that, he said quickly. Robert, you've been lying to me for 2 years. You've been stealing money from our joint account to finance an affair. You've been coming home to me after spending time with another woman, pretending everything was normal. Do you understand how much trust you've broken? His face crumpled. I know. I know I've been a coward and a liar. But I ended it with Catherine. I want to rebuild what we had. What we had wasn't working, I said firmly. That's why you looked elsewhere for excitement and companionship. We can't rebuild something that was already broken. We'd have to build something completely new. Over the next month, we tried. Robert made appointments with a marriage counselor and convinced me to attend sessions where we attempted to excavate the ruins of our relationship and determine whether anything salvageable remained. The counselor, Dr. Patricia Williams, was a woman about my age who'd specialized in helping long-term couples navigate major transitions. She asked hard questions and didn't accept surface answers. "Mary," she said during our third session, "you've talked a lot about what Robert did wrong and what changes you'd like to see from him. But what role did you play in the deterioration of your marriage?" The question stung because it forced me to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about my own contributions to our dysfunction. "I think I made myself too small," I said slowly. "I stopped expressing my needs because it seemed easier than dealing with conflict. I accepted less and less attention and affection until Robert forgot I needed those things at all. I became so focused on keeping everyone else happy that I lost track of my own happiness." "And how did that serve you?" Dr. Williams asked. "It didn't," I admitted. "It made me resentful and lonely. It taught my husband and children that they could take me for granted without consequences. It turned me into a person I don't recognize or respect." "Robert, Dr. Williams turned to my husband. "How did it feel to live with someone who never expressed needs clearly or set boundaries?" "Comfortable, I guess," he said. "I didn't have to worry about disappointing Mary because she never seemed to want anything from me except basic practical support." "Did that comfort serve your marriage well?" "No," he admitted. "It made our relationship boring. It made me feel like we were roommates instead of lovers. It made it easy for me to justify looking elsewhere for excitement." The counseling sessions were painful but illuminating. We'd both participated in the slow erosion of our connection, me by becoming smaller and more accommodating, Robert by accepting my self-diminishment as permission to invest his emotional energy elsewhere. But understanding how we'd arrived at our current situation didn't automatically provide a path forward. Some kinds of damage run too deep for repair, especially when trust has been shattered and patterns have calcified over decades. After 2 months of counseling, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I asked Robert to move out of our apartment temporarily so I could have space to think clearly about what I wanted for the rest of my life. "How long?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Maybe a few months. Maybe longer. I need to remember who I am when I'm not performing the role of wife and mother. I need to figure out whether I can forgive what happened and whether forgiveness would be enough to rebuild something worth having." Robert found a small furnished studio apartment 10 minutes away. We agreed he could take his clothes and personal items but that our shared belongings would remain in our apartment until we decided what came next. The first night alone in our home felt strange and liberating in equal measure. I cooked a simple dinner for one, something I'd enjoyed but Robert had never liked, and ate it while reading a book instead of watching his preferred television programs. I took a longer shower than usual and went to bed whenever I felt tired instead of waiting for him to finish his evening routine. The silence felt different than loneliness. It felt like possibility. Over the following weeks, I began to rediscover pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local community center and remembered how much I loved the way pigments bloomed across wet paper in ways I couldn't entirely control. I joined a book club at the library and discovered the joy of discussing literature with people who actually cared about my opinions. Most surprisingly, I began developing a genuine friendship with Rosa, my neighbor from the Bronx who'd offered support during my darkest moments. She was 75, widowed for 3 years, and had been rebuilding her own life after decades of caring for a husband with dementia. The hardest part, Rosa told me over coffee in her apartment, wasn't losing Miguel. The hardest part was remembering who I was without him. I'd been a caregiver for so long I'd forgotten I was also a person with my own interests and dreams. "How did you figure it out?" I asked. "Slowly," she said. "And with lots of mistakes. I tried things that didn't work. I made friends with people who turned out to be wrong for me. But gradually, I started recognizing my own voice again instead of just echoing what I thought other people wanted to hear. Through Rosa, I met other women our age who'd navigated major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, estrangement from adult children, financial setbacks. Many of their stories shared common themes: years of self-sacrifice that had become self-erasure, followed by difficult awakenings to their own worth. "Society tells us that by 70, we should be settled," said Margaret, a 78-year-old who'd left her husband of 52 years after discovering he'd been embezzling from her late mother's estate. "But settled doesn't have to mean dead inside. Some of us have decades left to live. Why should we spend them being miserable?" These conversations with women who'd chosen themselves later in life gave me courage to continue exploring what my own self-advocacy might look like. Meanwhile, Linda and David struggled to understand my transformation. They'd grown comfortable with a mother who was endlessly available and accommodating, who said yes to every request and absorbed every disappointment without complaint. "You seem angry all the time now," Linda said during one of our phone calls. "I'm not angry all the time," I corrected. "I'm angry about specific things that deserve anger. I'm angry that I wasted years accepting treatment that diminished my sense of self-worth. I'm angry that your father lied to me for 2 years while using our shared money to finance an affair. I'm angry that you and David call when you need something but rarely call just to see how I'm doing. That's not fair, Linda protested. We've been busy with our own lives. That's normal. And we didn't know Dad was having an affair. You didn't know because you weren't paying attention, I said. Not to him, not to me, not to whether your parents were actually happy or just going through the motions of being a family. So this is our fault somehow? Linda's voice rose in frustration. Your marriage problems are because David and I didn't call enough? No, I said carefully. Your father's choices are his responsibility, and my choices are mine. But the way our family operates, with me as the person everyone turns to for support but no one thinks to check on, that dynamic involved all of us. These conversations were painful but necessary. I was learning to state my feelings and needs directly instead of hoping others would intuit them. I was discovering that asking for what I wanted didn't make me selfish or difficult, it made me honest. 3 months after Robert moved out, he asked to take me to dinner to discuss our situation. I've been in individual therapy, he told me over pasta at a small Italian restaurant we'd never been to together. Trying to understand why I made the choices I made and how I let our marriage deteriorate so badly. What have you learned? I asked. That I stopped seeing you as a person with your own inner life, he said. Somewhere along the way, you became this reliable presence who handled domestic responsibilities and never demanded much attention. I took your strength and competence for granted and forgot that you might need romance and excitement and deep connection too. And Catherine provided those things? Robert looked uncomfortable but answered honestly. She made me feel interesting and desirable. She laughed at my jokes and wanted to hear my stories. She made me remember what it felt like to be pursued instead of just expected. The admission stung, but I appreciated his directness. Did you ever wonder if I might want to feel interesting and desirable too? I asked. Not really, he admitted. I assumed you were content with our routine. You never complained. You never asked for more. I shouldn't have had to ask, I said. In a healthy marriage, both partners pay attention to each other's happiness. Both partners invest in keeping romance and interest alive. I failed at that too, but your solution was to find those things with someone else while keeping me around to handle the practical aspects of your life. I know, he said quietly. I know it was cowardly and selfish. But I'm trying to change, Mary. I want to be the husband you deserve. I looked across the table at this man I'd shared most of my adult life with, and I felt something I hadn't expected, compassion. Not love, not forgiveness, but a kind of understanding for two people who'd lost their way so gradually that neither had noticed until they were completely lost. Robert, I said gently, I don't think you can become the husband I deserve because I don't think I'm the wife you need. We've grown into people who want fundamentally different things from life. What do you mean? I want adventure. I want deep conversations and spontaneous plans and friends who truly know me. I want to feel cherished and desired, not just useful. I want to travel and take classes and try things I've never done before. I can do those things with you, he said quickly. Can you? I asked. Or would you do them reluctantly to keep me from leaving, while secretly resenting the disruption to your comfortable routine? He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it as the truth of my words sank in. Maybe both, he said finally. That night, I made the decision I'd been avoiding for months. In the morning, I called Jennifer, my lawyer, and asked her to begin divorce proceedings. Are you sure? She asked. I'm sure I want the chance to spend whatever years I have left as my authentic self instead of as a smaller, accommodating version designed to avoid conflict, I replied. The divorce process was surprisingly straightforward, partly because Robert didn't contest anything. After 47 years of marriage, we had modest assets to divide, the apartment we'd finally finished paying for, our retirement accounts, some savings. The most complicated part was emotional rather than financial. Linda was devastated. Mom, you're 72 years old. Do you really want to spend your remaining years alone? I want to spend my remaining years with people who value my company and respect my contributions to their lives, I replied. If that means being alone sometimes, I think I'll prefer it to being lonely in a marriage that had stopped nourishing either of us. David was more practical in his concerns. What if you get sick? What if you need someone to take care of you? Then I'll figure out solutions, just like millions of other single people do, I said. I might need to hire help or move to assisted living eventually. But lots of married people end up in those situations too, especially women who typically outlive their husbands anyway. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Robert kept his studio apartment and some of our shared belongings. I kept our original apartment and the majority of our savings, not because I demanded more, but because he insisted I should have financial security. It's the least I can do, he said when we signed the final papers. After everything I put you through. On my first day as a divorced woman, I woke up in my own apartment, truly my own now, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the day ahead. I made coffee and sat by my kitchen window, watching the neighborhood wake up around me. Mrs. Chen was hanging laundry again, and I waved when she looked my way. She waved back and called out something in Mandarin that I didn't understand, but that sounded friendly. That afternoon, I had lunch with Rosa and Margaret and two other women from our informal support group. We talked about books and politics and travel plans and the small daily pleasures that make life worth living. No one needed anything from me except my company and conversation. No one treated me like a vending machine for emotional labor or financial assistance. "You look different," Margaret noted. "Calmer. More present." I thought about her observation later that day as I set up my watercolor supplies in the corner of my living room where Robert's recliner used to sit. She was right. I felt more present in my own life, more engaged with my actual thoughts and feelings instead of constantly monitoring everyone else's needs and moods. That evening, Linda called. "Mom, I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "Not for being upset about the divorce, I'm still processing that, but for the way I've treated you for years. Like you existed primarily to solve my problems and support my choices without having needs and dreams of your own." The apology surprised me so much I had to sit down. "What made you realize that?" I asked. "Therapy," she admitted. "After you and Dad split up, I started seeing someone to talk through my feelings about it. She helped me understand how I'd been relating to you, and how unfair that was." "I'm proud of you for doing that work," I said. "I want to try to have a real relationship with you," Linda continued. "Not just crisis calls and obligatory holiday visits, but actual mother-daughter friendship. If you're willing." "I'm very willing," I replied, surprised to find tears in my eyes. "Good. Then tell me about this painting class I heard you're taking. And that book club. And this friend Rosa who David says you have dinner with twice a week. I want to hear about your actual life, not just assume you're sitting around waiting for us to include you in ours." That conversation lasted 2 hours, the longest Linda and I had talked in years. She told me about challenges at work and concerns about Emma's adjustment to middle school and her own dreams of going back to graduate school someday. I told her about my artwork and the novel our book club was discussing and my plans to visit the art museums in Philadelphia next month. For the first time in years, we talked to each other as whole people instead of playing the limited roles of parent who provides and child who takes. A few weeks later, David made a similar call, though his apology was more awkward and his commitment to change more tentative. But it was a beginning, and I'd learned to value beginnings over perfect outcomes. Not everything in my life transformed overnight. Some relationships couldn't be repaired. Several longtime friends had apparently valued the old, accommodating Mary more than they appreciated my new directness and boundaries. Some challenges remained difficult: managing finances on a single income, dealing with minor health issues without a spouse to share the worry, navigating the occasional loneliness that comes with living alone. But the trade-offs felt worthwhile. In exchange for those challenges, I gained something I'd nearly forgotten existed: the sense that my life belonged to me. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I did something I'd been dreaming about since I was young. I planned a solo trip to Europe. Not an elaborate tour or luxury cruise, but a simple train journey through small towns in France and Italy, staying in modest hotels and hostels, eating local food and visiting local museums and walking through streets where no one knew my history or expectations. "Are you sure that's safe at your age?" David asked when I told him about my plans. "I'm sure it's necessary at my age," I replied. "I have maybe 15 or 20 good years left, if I'm lucky. I don't want to spend them being afraid of living." Linda was more supportive. "I think it's amazing, Mom. I wish I had your courage." "You have your own kind of courage," I told her. "You're raising Emma and building a career and pursuing dreams while juggling 100 responsibilities. That takes tremendous strength. But you're doing something just for yourself, just because it makes you happy," she said. "I can't remember the last time I did something purely for my own joy." "Then maybe it's time to think about that," I suggested. Role modeling self-care for Emma might be one of the best gifts you can give her. The European trip was everything I'd hoped and more. I spent 3 weeks moving slowly through small cities, taking painting classes in Provence, cooking lessons in Tuscany, long walks through museums and gardens and markets where vendors called out in languages I didn't speak but somehow understood meant "welcome" and "try this" and "enjoy." I met other solo travelers, including several women my age who'd also embarked on adventures after major life changes. We shared meals and stories and the particular camaraderie of people who'd chosen themselves over staying in situations that no longer served them. "My children thought I'd lost my mind," said Elizabeth, a 70-year-old from Australia who'd sold her house and been traveling for 2 years since her husband's death. "They wanted me to move in with one of them and spend my remaining years being helpful and unobtrusive. Instead, I'm having the best adventure of my life." "Do you ever regret not taking the safer path?" I asked. "Never," she replied firmly. I regret the years I wasted being small and careful and grateful for scraps of attention. But I'll never regret claiming joy for myself while I still have time to experience it fully. When I returned to New York, I brought with me a collection of watercolor paintings I'd made during the trip, scenes of sunlit piazzas and flower markets and quiet moments of beauty I'd finally been present enough to notice and capture. But more than the paintings, I brought back a deep sense of my own capability and worth. I'd navigated foreign cities and language barriers and travel complications. I'd made friends with strangers and solved problems and experienced wonder on my own terms. I was not, it turned out, too old for adventure. I was just getting started. Now, a year later, I sit in my apartment, writing in the journal that has become my constant companion. The morning sun streams through windows I've decorated with plants that thrive in the light. Rosa and I are planning a trip to see autumn leaves in Vermont next month. Linda calls every Sunday just to talk, and David has started texting me photos of his garden, asking for advice about flowers I actually know something about. Robert and I exchange cordial greetings when we run into each other at the grocery store or post office. He looks tired but not unhappy. I heard from Rosa, who hears everything, that he's dating someone new, a widow from his poker group who apparently shares his interest in routine and quiet evenings at home. I'm genuinely glad for him. We were married for 47 years, and that history deserves respect even if our future couldn't be shared. But I'm gladder for myself, for finding the courage to choose growth over comfort, authenticity over accommodation, possibilities over safety. The woman in that security camera footage, the one whose betrayal shattered my comfortable illusions, gave me an unintended gift. She showed me what I looked like from the outside, someone whose life had become so small she was barely visible even to herself. I'm visible now. To my children, who are learning to see me as a whole person rather than just their accommodating mother. To my friends, who value my opinions and seek my company because they enjoy it, not because they need something from me. To myself, most importantly, as someone whose dreams and desires and boundaries matter. Sometimes people ask if I'm lonely, living alone at 73. The question always makes me think of something Rosa once said: there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone means you have space to hear your own thoughts. Lonely means you've lost touch with your own worth. I'm alone sometimes, but I'm not lonely. How could I be lonely when I'm finally living in authentic relationship with myself? The security camera I installed to catch my husband's betrayal is long gone, but I've kept the habit of paying attention to my own needs, my own feelings, my own voice that speaks up now instead of staying silent. I watch for signs of my worth being diminished and my boundaries being crossed. I guard my well-being with the same fierce attention I once devoted to everyone else's comfort. This is what 73 looks like when you refuse to disappear: painting classes and book clubs and solo travel. Friendships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided service. Children who call because they want to hear your voice, not because they need something from your wallet. A home that feels peaceful instead of tense, decorated with colors that make you happy instead of neutral shades chosen to avoid conflict. This is what liberation looks like after decades of making yourself small, taking up space without apology, expressing needs without guilt, choosing yourself with the same dedication you once showed to choosing everyone else's comfort over your own fulfillment. If you're watching this and recognizing pieces of your own story, the quiet erosion of self-worth, the gradual disappearance into roles that serve others but starve your own soul, please know this: it's not too late. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to remember that your life belongs to you, not to the people who benefit from your self-sacrifice. The years you have left, whether that's 5 or 15 or 25, are too precious to spend being invisible. They're too valuable to waste on people who see you as convenient rather than cherished. They're too short to spend in situations that drain your spirit instead of nourishing your dreams. Have you lived something like this story? Have you felt yourself disappearing inside your own life, shrinking to accommodate others until you forgot you deserved to take up space? Have you given so much of yourself away that you lost track of who you were underneath all that service and sacrifice? Tell me about it in the comments below. Your story matters. Your experience deserves to be heard and honored and validated. And if this video helped you remember your own worth, if it gave you permission to choose yourself or courage to demand better treatment, please like it and subscribe. Sharing these stories, the difficult ones about finding yourself again after years of being lost, might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Your life is not over because you're older. Your story is not finished because you've made mistakes or accepted less than you deserved for too long. Every day you wake up is another chance to choose yourself, to honor your own dreams, to remember that respect is not optional and love should never be conditional on your ability to serve others at your own expense. Choose yourself. You're worth it. You always have been.